I've actually always said that I think Harris's biggest danger in this election is losing to the couch.
Yeah.
Democrats have the electorate to win. It's close enough in persuasion that they really just need to get their voters out, because if they can get 29-30% black turnout in Georgia, they win the election. Because if Trump loses Georgia, he's really got to sweep everything in order to win.
All right, we are back by special request of two VIP listeners of this podcast, my two younger brothers. One wanted a deep dive into what we know about the polls and what we know right now, looking at the electoral map. The other brother is a big fan of Split Ticket. It's a political and election enthusiast website, and the founder is here, Lakshya Jain. They do modeling, presenting electoral data, and he is one of the I think most foremost election Twitter nerds. So welcome to the Bulwark podcast.
Thanks for having me.
How is that intro? Do you have anything you'd like to add to Split Ticket great. For people who aren't familiar?
That was great.
Well, it's good to have you. I want to go state by state, and I just want to break things down for everybody about where things stand, what they should be nervous about, what they should be looking for on election day. But before we go to each individual state, I think it'd be interesting to kind of have a broader conversation about these models that everybody is familiar with right now. There's the Nate Silver model. There's 538, which is a new person that replaced Nate Silver. Real Clear Politics has a model that's more Republican friendly. You guys have a model. You did an article, I guess, at the end of last week, kind of talking about the different models, why they look differently, what they're showing. So why don't you just give us kind of a top level overview of what the polling models are saying right now?
Yeah, so it's important to note that every single one of those models is actually fundamentally saying the same thing, that this race is a toss-up, that there is no clear leader, and that you could really make a case for either candidate being ahead, because functionally, a model that says 47% for Harris is actually no real, it's actually not really any different from a model that says 53-47 for Harris.
Sounds a lot better, though. Makes me feel nicer to see 53 than 47. So it's important for our feelings.
I mean, this is the thing. No matter what things look like to the statistical nerd, the truth is that these models are only as good as the information that they can convey to readers. And so this is why forecasters really have to be careful in emphasizing who's ahead, who's not ahead, what a picture says. If a race says 53-47 Harris in probability, functionally that's 50-50, and you can actually make credible arguments that you would rather be the candidate at 47% if you think that there's something the model isn't capturing. Now, what differentiates each of these models is that they're built on internal polling aggregations and polling estimates. And depending on how you aggregate polls, you can get something like Harris plus 0.5 in Pennsylvania or Trump plus 0.5. It all depends on what you weight and the time horizon over which you weight it, and a whole bunch of other minor factors based on poll quality and whatnot. And so the truth is that the difference between our model and 538's model, 538 has Harris at 48%, we have her at 52%, is actually entirely based on our polling aggregation differences. That's really the biggest difference.
And what's the difference? They're including polls you don't include?
They're including Trafalgar, and they're including ActiveVote, but more than that,
Trafalgar.
they also,
but for people who don't know, Trafalgar is a right wing. It's kind of a MAGA polling firm that actually ended up being pretty bright in 2020, but was horrible in 2022, and clearly has a bias.
Yeah, but with that said, 538 does adjust polls for bias as well. So ideally, you would think them including Trafalgar doesn't change things as much. Really, the biggest change that I see from 538 to ours is that our model doesn't do internal polling adjustments based on national polls, whereas 538's polling model does. So I'll give you an example. If a survey is taken in Pennsylvania in mid-October, and that's the last survey in Pennsylvania, and it says Harris +1. Then over the next 2 weeks, Trump closes a gap by 2 points in national polling to go from Harris +3 to Harris +1. 538 will take that Harris +1 poll and adjust it downwards and say that, well, Harris lost some support nationally since that poll taken in Pennsylvania. Therefore, we can assume that she probably would do worse in Pennsylvania today than she would have on October 15th when that survey was taken. Ergo, we're going to downweight and adjust and really like reduce her support in Pennsylvania polling averages based on that. Now, there are credible reasons to do it that way. I
Sure.
just don't agree with that because, in my opinion, the people in swing states have been living in a completely different information environment.
Right.
And so the way the average voter nationally interfaces with the election and the news is not the same way that the average voter in Pennsylvania interfaces with the news. So the things that move things nationally may already have been priced in Pennsylvania and would not make as big of a difference. And that's why we don't make that adjustment. In that process, what happens is that 538 gets a slightly more Republican polling average than we would right now because Trump has gained in national polling. And so that's why 538 has Harris at 48 and we have Harris at 52.
One more thing on big picture before we go state by state. Well, there are actually two things. There are two other theories about what's happening out there. There's talk that there is Republican spamming of polls, like Republican firms are putting out junk polls that look more favorable to Republicans, and that explains why the Real Clear Politics example, they have Harris, or excuse me, they have Trump at the highest percentage to win because they include all those polls. So that's one thing that people discuss and the impact on that. The other one is a pet theory of mine. And others, I'm not alone in this pet theory, but that it seems like there's poll herding out there. Like pollsters are adjusting their weights to make sure they don't have an outlier poll, so they don't get ranked badly by 538 or Silver Bulletin or whatever, or just because they don't want to be embarrassed, for whatever the rationale is, that they're kind of herding around what the averages are, and so that makes it a little harder to see if there is a poll miss, which could benefit the vice president, could benefit Trump. It's harder to see that now since so many pollsters are hurting. What are your thoughts on both of those topics?
So let's take that point by point. There are two things that should be addressed here. The first is, are right-wing pollsters flooding the zone and comprising more of the set of polls than they did in 2020? The answer is unquestionably that there are more Republican-aligned polls now than there are in 2020. This is just a matter of simple math. You can count them up and you can look to see that now Republican-aligned polls are something like 35% of all of the polls in the database. In 2020, that was not the case. But it is also true that they do not actually impact the aggregate nearly as much as you would think. And here's why. We actually exert really strong controls on quality for a pollster and on partisan lean. And so if a Republican internal comes out, or if a Republican associated poll comes out from, say, like the Center for American Greatness or the Donald Trump campaign or whatever, we actually apply effects knowing how internal polls are typically biased, and we adjust based on that. So if the Center for American Greatness says Georgia is Trump +5, we don't take that at face value. We're like, okay, well, you are a Republican-aligned Republican firm. We are actually going to exert some controls and say, typically you are off by about 3 points as you're an internal, or 4 points. So
Sure.
we're actually adjusting your margin from Trump +5 to +1. And we do that for Democratic polls too. So if like the Harris campaign says Harris is up by 6 in Pennsylvania, we're going to be like, yeah, that's not happening. Typically Democratic polls are off in the other direction. So you adjust it back. The second thing is these internal polls are just not good quality pollsters in general. And so we not only downweight for affiliation, but we also downweight for quality. So polls like Patriot Polling do not get much weight in the averages as a result. So the end result is that if you look at our polling aggregates, in every case, if you removed the right-wing polls from the average, it would actually be just as bad or worse for Democrats than if you included everything. It doesn't make an effect.
What about the herding?
The effect is so marginal. The herding is a different part, and that is something that gives me more concern. See, the herding, it's not as simple as to say that because you get a bunch of 49, 48, 49, 49, 50, 48 results, that's herding, because when you wait on the same parameters and when everyone is waiting on such a tightly controlled data set, with such strict parameters, you are going to get results that are closer together than what a standard, normal, or random distribution would look like. That's just a matter of math because it reduces the variance. When all of you are weighting on the same exact factors, you're going to get results that are just much more similar than a random sample weighted on factors that can float around a little bit more than who did you vote for in 2020
Right.
type of things. So I don't actually know that I would call it all hurting. You would expect less variance now that pollsters have started to weight on things that are so tightly correlated to partisanship, like 2020 vote recall.
Sure.
With that said, there is still a shade too many 47-47 polls of Michigan and Pennsylvania for me to think that that's all just a matter of weighting and its artifacts. So yes, there is some hurting. No, it's not as much as people think. Yes, it reduces the aggregate accuracy overall. And that is exactly why I would not be surprised by a 2 or 3 point Kamala Harris overperformance or a 2 or 3 point Donald Trump overperformance on election day. Because when polls herd, it improves the accuracy of the overall pollster, but it actually reduces the accuracy of the aggregate as a whole.
All right, let's go through the states in the split ticket model. We're focusing obviously on the 7 states: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Let's go worst to best. What looks like the worst state right now to you for the vice president?
I think either Georgia or Arizona,
Let's talk
probably
about
among
both
the
of them.
worst states right now. Yeah, well, it's funny, right? Because you would expect North Carolina, based on priors, to be the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And I still feel like if you force me to pick where our model was wrong, I would say North Carolina is probably worse than both of them because I have such a hard time seeing Democrats finally get the monkey off their back and win that state presidentially. It's
I mean,
been one of
it
those.
could just be amazing what happens when you nominate a black Nazi. Who knows?
Well, that's the thing. If you look at the actual reasons behind why North Carolina might be left to the nation, you can make a coherent explanation. Hurricane Helene,
Yep.
and Mark Robinson creating some serious negative headlines and elevating the wrong issues into the news for Donald Trump, like abortion, election denial, fascism. And so, you know, it would be strange for Georgia and Arizona to be her actual worst states, but elections are weird and strange things happen. And so if you take that at face value, Arizona, there's slippage with Latinos. And in general, Harris seems to not be holding as much ground with whites as she should in order to win the state. And you can generally survive one of those things by gaining with the other group,
Right.
but you can't survive losing both. So if you're struggling with older whites and you're struggling with Latinos, that's a real killer in Arizona.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that polling is wrong. I mean, polling has underestimated Dems in Arizona lately, but I don't think that's really smart to do. You can't just assume the polls are going to be wrong in the direction you want it to. And so that's why I think after all of the evidence we have, Arizona does look like the toughest state. Georgia, it's very clear. The issue is black turnout for Kamala Harris. I'm not talking about the early voting. I'm talking about the fact that in 2020, the black turnout as a share of the electorate actually dropped from 2018 and 2016. From 2020 to 2022, there was a very big drop once again in black turnout. Yes, that was a midterm, but those voters still did not turn out, and that's voter energy you're going to have to recreate and get back on the road. Georgia is the most black swing state of them all. It's blacker than North Carolina. And as a result, given how Republican whites in Georgia are, even a 2 to 3% dip in relative black turnout would cost Harris that state. And that's why our model is so bearish, because it looks at the polls that have Harris down. And in each of those polls, she is losing because she's losing just a little bit of ground with white voters and black voters, but really the composition of the electorate is worse for her than it would have been in 2020. And that's why, unless Democrats fix their black voter turnout, which they very well could, they would be on track to lose that state today.
Is that about people moving into the state? Like, is it about the composition and the makeup of the state, or is it just flat about just about engagement and turnout among different black demographics. Do we know?
No, it's about turnout.
Yeah.
It's really about turnout. It's not about people moving into the state. That state is getting more and more non-white every year. It's not about like, migration or anything like
Right.
that. The thing is just that no matter what you look at, it's not about the number of people that live in the state. It's not just about the voting age population, because otherwise Texas would be a lot bluer than it is. It's about who turns out to vote. And really, Democrats struggle with just getting those black voters out to the polls. That's the
Hmm.
problem for them.
This is why I mean, Georgia is just the prime example of like the two groups that matter in the last few weeks to me is college educated traditional Republican upper middle class to upper class whites, and there are a lot of those in Buckhead, and getting them to actually vote for Kamala rather than leaving the top blank. And then the inverse side of the demographics,
Yeah.
like non-college, lower income voters of color, particularly blacks, and getting them to vote off the couch versus voting for Kamala, right? Like it's not so much like a Trump versus Kamala swing voter. Like those are the two demos that they need to maximize in the last week, and they're both like a very like particularly acute in Georgia.
And that's an interesting point you bring up, because I've actually always said that I think Harris's biggest danger in this election is losing to the couch,
Yeah.
because I think Democrats have the electorate to win. It's close enough in persuasion that they really just need to get their voters out, because if they can get 29-30% black turnout in Georgia, they win the election.
Yeah.
The problem is just because if Trump loses Georgia, he's really got to sweep everything in order to win.
We'll circle back on that in the final, kind of the different ways the map could shake out. So the least important state kind of on the map then is Nevada, just because how few electoral votes it has. But talk about what the model's showing in Nevada.
Well, Nevada is really just razor tight. It's a 50-50 flip, quite literally. It's something where people have celebrated for Republicans a lot because of the early vote. We're actually very skeptical of that. Typically, when you see one party show up a lot in early voting, the other party shows up on election day.
Yeah.
Voters show up no matter what. It's just a question of when. And so right now, the model takes the polling in Nevada more literally. And the polling in Nevada is all uniformly just 48-47, 47-48, 46-47. And so there's no clear leader in that state. And I don't think we're going to get any news on that state that will inform our priors until the morning of election day, when Ralston makes his predictions. And that's when we'll probably see how things look. The model can't read John Ralston, so there's a very good chance we're going to pick against him, and that'll turn out great for us, I'm sure.
Friend of the pod, John Ralston. People should check out he does daily updates on the early vote. I'm with you. You can't know anything. And I've talked to really smart Republicans who are like, look, we've moved a lot. Like you'll see if you're an obsessive and you're on Twitter, you'll see people tweeting like, "Oh, 50% of X county in Nevada has already turned out it's a Republican." It's like Republicans are voting earlier this time. They don't trust the mail because of Donald Trump. They didn't vote early last time because of Donald Trump, and so their voting patterns are different. Old people vote earlier, despite the fact that Kamala has some gains there. Old people still are more Republican. And it's just like we just don't know anything yet. So to me, it's like kind of ridiculous to obsess over that when there's still a whole 6 more days of early voting left. All right, now we move to North Carolina, which you talked about a little bit already. But I want to hear a little bit more on what the model is showing. And to me, North Carolina is particularly important when we get to the scenario planning at the very end. So talk about how the model shows North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, with North Carolina, it somehow shows that as the closest of the three critical Sunbelt states: Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Harris has gotten pretty good polling in North Carolina lately.
Yeah.
It's broadly showing a slight swing left from 2020, which would be a surprise. But then you remember that in the midterms, North Carolina was actually to the left of Georgia. So it would not be a surprise, empirically speaking, to see that happen again. If Democrats struggle with black turnout in Georgia, at the end of the day, North Carolina is less black of a state. It's a little bit more white. It's the type of state where there's enough other factors that are blowing the wind in the back of the Democrats to where you
Yeah.
could conceivably see that maybe bucking national trends by a little. It doesn't have to do a lot. It just has to do a little bit in order for Democrats to somehow come up ahead. And so right now, we think Donald Trump wins it by about a point, but it's very possible that that actually ends up wrong on election day, because a model that shows a candidate winning the state by a point is functionally saying it's a very close race and there's maybe only a slight edge for one guy.
All right, my friend Peter Hamby talks about North Carolina versus Georgia and what could explain it. It's like North Carolina has ACC whites and Georgia has SEC whites, and so maybe the whites in North Carolina vote at a higher rate for Kamala Harris than the whites that you get in Georgia. Just a slightly different flavor. Let's move up to the Upper Midwest. Which state does the looks the creakiest for Kamala Harris in the blue wall? And listeners of this podcast know, but we'll just say if she wins these three states plus Nebraska too, which there was a poll with her up 12 in that just the other day, then she's the next president. So obviously the most important states for her. Which one looks the creakiest to you?
To me, I think the creakiest is Wisconsin. I think that is the hardest one because it's just a little bit less urban than Pennsylvania. It's a little bit more it's a little bit more white in general, but a little bit more non-college white.
Yeah, right.
So, that already makes the electorate just a little bit less friendly for Democrats. I think as a result, Democrats are probably going to have the hardest time keeping Wisconsin. Now, we think they keep it by about 2020 margins, but it's very close. Both that and Pennsylvania are basically dead even in our model. I do think Pennsylvania is one of those states in which Trump has a more uphill challenge than the numbers might suggest. It's one of those very socially liberal states. Democrats have pretty good turnout in both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, but the ceiling for them is higher in Pennsylvania than it is in Wisconsin. And if Democratic turnout operations look good in Pennsylvania and they manage to finally turn out Philly, which is always the big wild card for them, you could see Harris doing better there than she would in Wisconsin. It's more urban, it's less religious, it's less white. So a few things with the wind blowing at her back for her there. Neither of them are nearly as good as Michigan is for her. That's the one that I would be very surprised if she loses. We have
Talk
that as leans Democratic.
about what the model is showing for Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan is leans Democratic. That's the one state where we don't think Donald Trump actually is going to pull it out there. And with the Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, we have Harris narrowly winning. We could see a Trump victory very easily. Michigan, Trump's odds of winning are like Harris's odds of winning like Arizona. It doesn't look great for him. And the reason for that is because Michigan is just the most friendly electorate. It's the bluest state for Democrats in general. It was Biden +3. And in an environment where the swing states are broadly behaving like they did in 2020 or 2022, that's the type of thing where you're like, okay, well, that's a Biden +3 state. And if there's minimal swing, Trump is going to have to make some serious gains across the board in order to flip that state. People keep saying the Israel-Palestine war. Yes, that cost Kamala Harris in Dearborn. Yes, that place is going to swing right. But that's less than 1% of the state overall. That still gives her room to play with. And so we think she ends up winning the state by about 1.5, 2 points or so. And I think broadly, Michigan is probably the best play for her.
All right. Final. So just going through the map. So your model narrowly. Obviously, this is not predictive. We're statistically literate here, but if you were to apply the model to the states, it end up with Kamala Harris 270, Donald Trump 268, and all of us breathing into a paper bag. The alternate options there are basically, in short, a loss in Wisconsin could be replaced by a win in North Carolina. That's not crazy compared with your model, and your model is showing both of those states pretty similarly, right? With Wisconsin slightly more favorable to Harris.
Exactly.
So that would be one option. If Pennsylvania is the one that drops off, that would have to be replaced by either North Carolina and Nevada. Well, I guess really any of the states except for Arizona. So either North Carolina or Georgia.
States.
Yeah.
If you lose Pennsylvania, you would need North Carolina, and one other state. So yeah, or Georgia and Nevada. You just need a
Yeah.
combination of the two other states in order to win.
Yeah, but the West doesn't help you. Arizona and Nevada doesn't help you. So you need to win one of the two Southeast states,
Yeah,
or both of
basically, you need
them,
to win one of Georgia or North Carolina.
plus Nevada. The other shorthand is you win Pennsylvania and Georgia. And so, I mean, like, so from the Trump side of things, they just need to win Pennsylvania and Georgia, and it's a win.
Yeah, basically.
Right. So that's why that's the most important. And I think on election night, one thing for everybody to really look to, I'm interested in which, how your model or how you'll be looking at this, but it seems to me Georgia is going to count the quickest. Pennsylvania has a very strange counting system that's going to hopefully be faster than last time, but take a little while. North Carolina, I think it's going to take longer than last time, partially because of the hurricane, partially because of some changes that they made in the legislature, which are bad. Michigan, I guess, is on Eastern time, so we could get some Michigan numbers early. But I think the Georgia, for as maligned as Georgia's been about their changes that they made to their voting system, one thing they did right was they're going to count this thing a lot faster. So even if Georgia is not a must win for Harris, I'm wondering, is there anything that you're looking for early on Tuesday and results coming in from Georgia?
Yeah, I think the good thing about Georgia is Raffensperger's made a lot of changes that will allow them to count a lot quicker. About
Yeah.
75% of the votes will be completely counted by 8 p.m., which is like almost Florida level fast.
Yeah.
So I would probably look at a few things. Firstly, how's she doing in that Atlanta suburban core? That will tell us a little bit about how the rest of the night is going to go, even in the other states. If she's making massive gains in Cobb and Gwinnett, she's probably also doing that in Bucks County in Philadelphia, right? So in the Philly collar, that type of thing, you could get some type of signal based on how Georgia looks. You could get a signal on how Waukesha, Washington, Ozaki in Wisconsin would look if you look at some of the exurbs that are super, super white in Georgia. Like if you look at Cherokee, if you look at Forsyth. Yeah. So that's the type of thing that I'll be looking for. How is she doing in those suburban counties in Georgia specifically? That can give you a signal for the Rust Belt. Now, of course, there's the question of how she would do in, just Georgia itself. And for that, you really need to look at Atlanta proper. And then I would look at two specific bellwether counties to see if she's getting the rural black turnout she needs. Baldwin County and Washington County. Baldwin is a county that basically every Democrat who's won statewide since 2020, so Biden, Ossoff, Warnock, and Warnock again, every single one of those has flipped Baldwin or won Baldwin. And the reason for that is because it's so racially polarized that if Democrats are winning it, they're getting the black turnout they need.
Lakshya, thank you so much. Maybe we'll have you on election night. We're having Zoom. Are you guys doing a live stream? What's Split Ticket doing election night?
So I am joining BBC.
Oh, good for you.
Harrison is going to be doing our live stream on election night with Max and Leon. So they're going to be doing the Split Ticket stream.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. We'll maybe do it. We'll do a crossover. We'll talk to you that offline. I appreciate you coming on and giving us the dorky deep dive that my brothers were looking for. Everybody else, stick around. I've got a little rant about the GarbageGate that is surrounding that is wall to wall news over on Fox right now. Thanks so much, Lakshya Jain.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, y'all, final topic. There will be much discussion over on Fox in the last week of the campaign over this audio from yesterday where Joe Biden maybe possibly refers to Trump supporters as garbage. So I wanted to give you a couple quick thoughts on it to close the pod today. If you missed what we're talking about, here is the audio of the president talking on a Voto Latino Zoom.
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American.
So to me, this is basically incomprehensible. What he's trying to say. Did he say it? Didn't he? Did he intend to? Who knows? I think he almost certainly didn't mean to call Trump supporters garbage. Certainly he was talking about this guy, the comic, who is garbage. That's no debate there. But like the reality is, like there's just no deciphering that paragraph. It's going to be a Rorschach test for people to hear what they want to hear. So I have two thoughts. One is about the right-wing media and us, all of us actually, and the second is about Biden and Harris. For the right-wing media, there is an epidemic out there and what I call social media flopping in like soccer or basketball, where you pretend you got hit to get a foul call. People are pretending to be upset to get a foul called on their political opponents. Like a good rule of thumb in general is if a person is happy that somebody messed up rather than offended, that they pretend to be offended, they're flopping. All right. If you're happy that Joe Biden messed up, you're not actually offended. You're happy. This sort of thing happens actually across the ideological spectrum. So if you do it, if I do it, we all need to stop. But it is so acute on the right. I mean, the right is just like Megyn Kelly's podcast is almost all flopping all the time. As far as Biden is concerned, nobody was actually offended by what he's trying to say. All right. It was at worst a slip of the tongue. He immediately cleaned it up. And then later he sent out a tweet. So the mainstream media, if you're listening, don't be credulous and pretend to take the complaints seriously from people who are obviously overjoyed. They got to make hay out of this. You can't let people pretend to be mad when they're clearly overjoyed. But we also need to just talk about the Biden of this real quick. There have also been a few articles recently about how he wants to be out doing more and his team feels affronted by slights from Kamala's team and this or that. And I'm just begging people, can we all be adults for the last week of this campaign to save the country and his legacy, by the way? Joe Biden needs to give Kamala room to run her campaign. He shouldn't be worrying about his feelings. Nobody around him should be worrying about his feelings in this moment. And he shouldn't be making anyone feel like his feelings should be a consideration in their mind. Ever since he left the race, I just, like, the president has been treated by Democrats like a depressed child or somebody in a vulnerable situation who needs to be treated with kid gloves. He's the president of the United States. We all got to buck up and recognize that in this moment, his highest and best use is working in private and being president, not being in the campaign. I'm sure that sucks for him, but the stakes are very high. And people got to set their ego and their sensitivities aside. I promise you, if I had done something to embarrass Kamala, and as a result I had to quit podcasting and stop tweeting for a week, do you think I'd take one night to think about it? Do you think I'd pout? Do you think I'd say, well, I really like to be out? No, I wouldn't passive aggressively make comments about it. I'd be on a beach yoga retreat for a week, hoping that you guys finish the job. All right. So Harris campaign, I'm glad to see, as I've been on this podcast, she put out this statement. I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. You heard my speech last night. I believe the work that I do is about representing all the people, whether they support me or not. I will be a president for all Americans. That's a great message. She gave a great message last night. Everybody, do what you need to do in the last 7 days. Stop walking on eggshells. Kamala Harris is the nominee. Kamala Harris is going to be the next president. It is winning time. Let's act like it. We'll see you all back here tomorrow with podcast favorite, Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Peace out.